So during a during a fencing practice, I know that I've seen some clubs work the fencers really hard physically before they do their actual fencing, and some of them do the fencing and then do the conditioning afterwards. As trainers, is there an accepted like opinion on whether it's better to do conditioning before you actually do the sport or afterwards, or does that vary based on the person?
You seem to be ready, Ahmed, but I'll add if I have anything.
Yeah. And I am ready with that, Andrew, because I get that a lot. And it is going to vary. Uh, for me, it's going to vary with the individual athlete, right? Because you have a different training time. I don't know what your training time is going to be. You have to think about, okay, that person's also going to school, different things that are just happening in their life, right? So it's like, all right, when are they actually available to do this conditioning, if we want to put that in, right? And for some, it's going to be, hey, I can only get my conditioning in after fencing. I'm like, well, how long are you fencing for? Well, I'm going to be fencing for 3 hours. I'm like, you sure you want to do your conditioning after that? Sure it's going to be good for you? But what I'll say to that is if you have time where you can do it beforehand, um, let's say, and I don't know, let's say you're fencing at 5 o'clock. That's when you got to do your lessons. We have to, fence. If you have time where you can do your conditioning early on in the day, if you're able to do that, I would say do that then, if you can. And then also, you have that time to fence. I know for some fences, it's just hard to get out of that because they are with their coach and their coach has this prescribed time to do that conditioning. And that's just what they just have to do. It's just hard to escape that. I don't knock them for it. It's tough, but I always think of, well, if I'm going to tire out this athlete, at this time, and now they have to go, fence and put in 100% into that, fencing right after. I don't know how much they're going to give, So it varies. It really varies. In a perfect world, for me, it's more like, okay, let's get our conditioning early in the morning. Let's come out, let's work out later on. Today you have some rest in between. You're able to get some nutrients into your body, and then now you're strong enough here. Let's get into our strength conditioning, or let's get into the fencing. Right? That's in a perfect world, but it's not a perfect world when it's coming with the fencing, and it's
Yeah.
understandable. So it varies on. It does vary on the athlete and how their schedule really is.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah, I was going to just like to highlight from what you said, fencing is the most important thing that we do.
Yeah.
So you need to make sure that your fencing practice has quality and like you need to be focused, right?
Yeah.
So if you're hurting that, then that is a problem. In terms of like strength versus conditioning, like I don't really recommend conditioning happens earlier in the day in terms of cardio type stuff.
Yeah.
I would prefer to see that later on or on a non-fencing day because I think that they're too similar in stimulus so that they like that would affect your fencing more. Whereas you might be able to do some strength and power work. In fact, I do it once, maybe twice a week, depending on my schedule, where I train like lift in the morning, jumps, lifting, whatever. And then in the afternoon, I fence. And generally, if you can keep like a 6-hour block between them, that should be fine in terms of recovery. But that said, like if you don't have that 6-hour block, don't just not do it. Like it's better that you do these things.
Mm-hmm.
Now, obviously, you want to talk to a trainer in terms of managing volume and stuff like that. But I think I would say generally before, but make sure there's a gap. Or if you're going to do some sprints at the beginning of practice, it's not for cardio. It's for like nervous system activation and sprint training.
Yeah.
And that's the tough part. Yeah, and that's the tough part. Exactly what Kelleigh said. That's the tough part, Andrew, is just that with fencing schedules, and it's just finding that time. We both, we can see that like with the young athletes, their days are full. It's you're going to school, you have your lesson, you have your training, you have to go to a tournament that weekend. It's just so much in there. So it's just finding this time as best as we can to where they can get that strength training and where they can get, their conditioning work into it. It's really
you get a lot of conditioning out of a fencing practice too. You need to remember.
Yeah, totally.
You're right.
So if you don't have like a lot of training partners and you don't come out of practice very tired, or you're like way higher than your training partners, like if that's your training environment, then I might like emphasize the conditioning for that athlete. But like personally, I'm like drenched after a night at Fencers Club,
Yeah, you should be.